My dad slid a piece of paper across the kitchen table and told me to sign it. I was 16 years old. It said I owed them $350 a month for room and board, starting that Friday. I'm Emma Walsh. That was the night I found out my own parents saw me as a tenant, not a daughter. We weren't broke, not even close. Dad drove a company truck, took client trips to Vegas twice a year, and kept a running tab at the steakhouse on Broadway Avenue like it was his personal cafeteria. Mom got her nails done every 2 weeks, had a walk-in closet full of clothes still sitting there with tags on, and never once looked up from her phone when I asked for gas money. But somewhere between my 15th and 16th birthday, they decided I'd become a problem to be managed instead of a kid to raise, a line item instead of a daughter. It didn't happen all at once. It crept in, piece by piece. First, they stopped restocking my school supplies, said I was old enough to buy my own now. Then, lunch money dried up completely. I started skipping lunch some days or splitting a granola bar with whoever felt sorry for me at the table. Dad had a whole speech ready for it, something he must have picked up from a podcast or a guy at the gym. Kids in other countries were working full jobs at my age, he said, and I needed to learn the value of $1. He said it with a mouthful of ribeye he never once offered me a bite of. So I adapted. I got a job at a tire shop off Fairview Avenue, sweeping floors and organizing the back room 3 afternoons after school. My boss, a guy named Russ, didn't ask a lot of questions, but he noticed things. He noticed I showed up hungry most days and started leaving a box of protein bars and bottled water in the break room without making a thing of it. He noticed my shoes were falling apart and left an old pair of his son's work boots on the bench with no note attached. I banked every dollar I earned in an account across town, one my parents didn't know existed, opened with my school ID and a copy of my birth certificate I found buried in a filing cabinet. For the first time since any of this started, I had something that was actually mine, something Bay couldn't touch. That's exactly why my dad slid that contract across the table 2 weeks later, because somehow he'd found out I had money saved up, and he wanted a cut of it. "You're part of this family," he said, tapping the paper like it was a business deal and not a shakedown. My mom stood behind him with her arms crossed tight, saying nothing at all, which told me everything I needed to know about where she actually stood, underneath all the talk about family. I did the math in my head while they both watched me, waiting. $350 a month plus a share of the utilities would leave me almost nothing left over. Not for food, not for gas to get to work, not for anything they'd already quietly stopped covering 2 years before. "I need a few days to think about it," I said. My dad's jaw tightened, that vein by his temple starting to show. Real family doesn't need a few days to think about helping out. My mom's voice cracked in behind him, quiet but sharp. "We've given you everything, Emma, everything." "You just put in a new patio," I said. "Pavers, the whole outdoor kitchen setup? You're not struggling, you're choosing this." That shut her up long enough for me to grab my bag off the chair and walk straight to my room before either of them could say another word. I locked the door behind me, slid down against it until I was sitting on the floor, and pulled out my phone. Not to text a friend and vent about it, to search something I never in my life thought I'd need to look up at 16 years old. Can my parents legally charge me rent? What I found that night didn't fix anything. It didn't put food in the fridge or make the contract disappear off the counter, but it planted something in me that hadn't been there before, a name for what was actually happening to me. A reason to believe for the first time that this wasn't normal and none of it was my fault. I did something else that night, too. I dug out an old spiral notebook from under my bed and started writing things down. Dates, what they bought for themselves that week versus what they refused to buy for me. the conversation at the kitchen table, as close to word for word as I could get it while it was still fresh. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with any of it. I just had this feeling, sitting there on my bedroom floor, that one day the gap between who my parents pretended to be and who they actually were behind closed doors was going to matter. And when that day came, I wanted proof in my hands, not just a memory nobody would believe. For the next 2 weeks, I kept my head down, went to work, came home, did my homework, said as little as possible at dinner. I thought maybe if I just stayed quiet, the contract would fade into the background the way half their threats usually did. I was wrong. I came home from my shift on a Wednesday and something felt off before I even got my key in the door. My bedroom door was standing wide open, which I never left it. My backpack was unzipped and turned over on the bed, contents dumped out, like someone had gone through it fast and didn't care if I noticed. And the notebook I'd hidden in the bottom drawer, buried under a stack of winter clothes, was sitting right in the middle of my desk, open, exactly where I hadn't left it. I heard footsteps behind me in the hallway before I even turned around. My dad was standing in the doorway, and he wasn't smiling. My dad stood in my bedroom doorway with my notebook in his hand, and for a second neither of us said anything. "You've been keeping files on your own parents," he said. His voice was flat, controlled, which was worse than yelling. "Like we're criminals." "It's for school," I said. "Dollars saved up and you're writing down what we buy at the grocery store? What is this supposed to prove?" I didn't answer. He closed the notebook and slid it into his back pocket like it belonged to him now. "Phone, laptop, both of them tonight," he said. "You'll earn them back when you remember whose house this is." That was Wednesday. I didn't get either one back for 2 weeks. What he didn't know was that I'd already backed up the important stuff, photos of the contract, screenshots of their spending, all of it, to an account he'd never find. I'd started doing that after the first time he went through my room. I just hadn't gotten around to backing up the notebook itself, and that was on me. 3 weeks of notes gone, just because I'd gotten comfortable. My Aunt Carol lived 20 minutes away in Nampa, and she was the only person on my mom's side who ever asked me real questions instead of surface ones. I started walking to her place after my shifts at the tire shop instead of going straight home, telling my parents I was picking up extra hours. Carol never pushed, never made it a whole thing. She just kept a plate of food warm for me most nights and let me sit at her kitchen table doing homework in peace. One night I told her about the notebook, about the contract, about all of it. She got quiet for a long time, staring at her coffee. "Your mom used to be different, before your dad's job took off. I don't know when it all started slipping." That was the first time anyone had confirmed what I already suspected, that this wasn't always who they were, and somewhere along the way, my dad's need for control had swallowed whatever was left of the people they used to be. Carol didn't have much money herself, but she slipped me $40 that night and told me to keep it somewhere safe, for when you need it and can't ask anyone, she said. I used the library computers to search for legal aid in the county. Called 3 numbers before I got a real person, a woman named Denise at the county legal assistance office, sharp and clearly buried under more cases than she could handle. I told her about the contract, the $350 a month, the notebook my dad had confiscated like evidence. Her tone changed the second I mentioned the contract. Parents in Idaho have a legal obligation to provide food, shelter, clothing, and basic care until you're 18, she told me. They cannot legally charge you rent as a minor living in their home. That's not a gray area. She said she'd draft a letter laying out their obligations, but she was honest with me too. She had dozens of open cases, and there'd be stretches where she wouldn't be able to get back to me fast. I needed to be ready for that. The letter went out by certified mail 4 days later. I wasn't home when it arrived, but I knew something had changed the second I walked through the front door after my shift. The house felt different, quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful. My dad was sitting at the kitchen table with the letter unfolded in front of him, both hands flat on the surface. My mom stood behind him, arms crossed, eyes red like she'd been crying or fighting or both. "You got a lawyer involved in our family," he said, not a question. I didn't answer. "You have no idea what you just started." My mom's voice came in behind him, quieter. "People are going to think we're terrible parents, Emma. Do you understand what you've done?" I stood there with my backpack still on my shoulder, held my dad's stare until he was the one who looked away first, and then I walked past both of them to my room. I could hear them arguing through the walls for almost 2 hours that night, muffled back and forth, each one blaming the other for how far things had gotten. The contract didn't come up again after that. It just quietly disappeared off the kitchen counter, like it had never existed. But 2 days later, I noticed something new when I opened the pantry looking for something to eat before my shift. A keyed padlock, brand new, screwed into the doorframe. Only my parents had keys. The fridge itself stayed open and stocked with raw ingredients, things that needed oil, seasoning, rice, all locked away behind that door. Food existed in that house, it just wasn't mine to use. I stood there staring at that padlock for a long moment, and I understood something clearly for the first time. My parents weren't backing down because of the letter, they were just getting better at hiding what they were already doing. That Friday, my mom told me she'd be checking my work schedule directly with my boss now. "Just so we know where you are," she said, like it was concern and not surveillance. I said okay and went to my room. What I didn't tell her was that Denise had already warned me this exact thing might happen, that when parents like mine get cornered, they don't stop, they just get quieter about it. I had no idea yet how right she was. The pantry stayed locked for a full month before anything changed. I'd gotten used to working around it, eating at Aunt Carol's when I could, keeping granola bars in my backpack, buying my own groceries with money I hid in a shoebox at the bottom of my closet. My parents never brought up the letter from Denise again, but the silence wasn't peace. It was them regrouping. My dad's job had him traveling more that month, selling industrial equipment across 3 states, gone Monday through Thursday most weeks. My mom picked up extra shifts at the salon downtown to cover what he called our extra expenses, expenses that never seemed to include groceries for me. One Tuesday night, my mom came into the kitchen while I was standing at the counter eating plain toast because that's all that wasn't locked up. She stood there for a second, watching me, then walked to the pantry, unlocked it, and pulled out a can of soup, set it down next to me without a word, went back to her room. She never mentioned it again. My dad never found out, but it told me something. She knew exactly what was happening in her own house, and she let it keep happening anyway, except on the nights guilt caught up with her faster than fear did. I kept documenting everything. Photos of the padlock, screenshots of the family Amazon account showing what they bought for themselves. I moved everything to a cloud folder this time, nothing left sitting around the house for my dad to find twice. Then came the workplace visit. I was in the middle of a shift at the tire shop when my dad walked in, no warning, straight past Russ into the bay where I was working. "You think you're a big man now?" he said, loud enough for 2 customers to hear. "Making money, keeping secrets, acting like you don't owe this family anything?" I kept my hands on what I was doing and didn't look up. "I'm out there killing myself for this family, and you're in here playing mechanic like you're better than us." Russ stepped between us fast. "You need to leave, now. That's my daughter. I have every right. You have the right to walk out that door before I call the police. Pick one." My dad knocked a wrench off the workbench on his way out, and it clattered across the concrete for what felt like a full minute after he was gone. Russ filed a police report that same afternoon, said it was for the record in case anything like it happened again. That night, my dad didn't come home until almost 11. When he did, he didn't say a word to me, just went straight to bed like nothing happened. 3 days later, Denise called. She'd gotten the police report from Russ's filing and said it changed the shape of my case. An incident at my workplace, witnessed by a third party, was exactly the kind of documented behavior that made a difference in family court. She told me to keep going, keep recording, and to reach out if anything else happened. I thought that would be the worst of it for a while. I was wrong. 3 days after the shop incident, I came home to find my bedroom door missing from its hinges completely, just gone. No warning, no explanation waiting for me. My mom was standing in the hallway when I walked in, and she wouldn't meet my eyes. "Where's my door?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just looked past me down the hallway like she was waiting for someone else to explain it instead of her. That's when I heard my dad's footsteps coming up behind me. My dad stood in the hallway behind me, arms crossed, waiting for me to ask about the door again. "You lost the privilege of privacy," he said. "Acting like a guest in this house instead of family, you get treated like one." I didn't argue. I went to my room, the doorless room, and packed a bag with what mattered: my laptop charger, the shoebox of cash, a change of clothes. I called Aunt Carol from the bathroom, the only room in the house with a working lock, and asked if I could stay with her for a few days. She didn't hesitate. "Come now." I told Denise what happened the next morning: the missing door, my dad's exact words, the timeline. She went quiet on the phone for a second, then said something I hadn't heard from her before. "Emma, I think it's time we talk about filing with family court directly. This has gone past what a letter can fix." It took 2 weeks to find an attorney willing to take my case pro bono through the County Bar Association. Her name was Patricia Nolan, and she read through everything I'd saved: the contract, the padlock photos, the police report from the shop, Denise's letter, without saying much until she got to the end. "This is a strong case," she told me. "Financial neglect, retaliatory behavior, a documented pattern over more than a year. Courts don't like patterns like this." The filing triggered an investigation. My parents had to hand over financial records, and a court-appointed investigator started calling people they'd listed as references, people from their church, a couple of my dad's coworkers. What none of them realized was that some of those people had already seen things. One of my dad's coworkers mentioned almost in passing that my dad had told people at work I was going through something and not myself lately. The same story he'd apparently been telling everyone, dressed up different ways depending on the audience. The investigator compared that story to my school records: solid attendance, no disciplinary history, a letter of recommendation from my shop teacher describing me as one of the most reliable students he'd taught in years. The gap between what my dad was telling people and what was actually true was wide enough that the investigator flagged it in her report as a possible pattern of manipulation. My mom's interview went worse for them than either of them expected. She brought up the rent contract herself, tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, not realizing the investigator already had a copy of it in the file. When she was shown the actual document demanding $350 a month from a 16-year-old, she admitted my dad had written it, that she'd gone along with things she knew weren't right, and that things at home had been worse than she'd let anyone believe. That interview is what finally cracked whatever united front they had left. The court date landed in October. I sat in a courtroom with Patricia beside me, watching a judge go through the binder Denise and I had built for over a year. Photos, letters, the police report, the investigators' findings. My dad sat across the room in a suit he probably bought just for the hearing. My mom sat next to him, hands folded, staring at the table. The judge looked at both of them for a long moment before she spoke. This court finds a documented pattern of financial neglect and retaliatory conduct toward a minor child. That finding will be entered into the family services record for both parents. My dad's face didn't move. My mom's eyes filled up, but she didn't say anything either. The judge ordered mandatory parenting classes, continued monitoring for the next 12 months, and appointed a guardian ad litem to check in on me directly going forward. I walked out of that courtroom with Aunt Carol's hand on my shoulder, and for the first time in over a year, I didn't feel like I had to look over my shoulder for what was coming next. But word about the hearing didn't stay contained, and what happened when my dad's own church friends found out was something none of us saw coming. Word about the court finding got out fast, and it wasn't me who spread it. Patricia had warned me that family court records could become part of public record depending on the case, and someone connected to my dad's job search, he'd been quietly looking for a new sales territory, found out about the finding during a background check. He didn't get the job. When people started asking why, the story came out in pieces, the way these things do. My dad's church stopped being as welcoming as it used to be. Nobody said anything to his face, from what I heard. They just stopped calling him for the men's group he used to help organize. My mom told Aunt Carol on the phone that people had started giving them a certain kind of look at the grocery store, the kind that doesn't need words attached to it. The guardian ad litem checked in with me every few weeks that first year, and Denise stayed in touch even after her caseload should have buried the whole thing. My parents completed the court-ordered parenting classes. My dad's job situation stayed rocky for a while. The industry he worked in wasn't big, and word about the court finding traveled inside it faster than he expected. I stayed with Aunt Carol through the rest of high school. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't lecture me about my parents or tell me how to feel about any of it. She just made sure there was food in the fridge and never once made me feel like I owed her an explanation for eating it. My mom reached out about 6 months after the hearing. Not an apology exactly, more like she was trying to find her way back into being someone I could trust again. I told her I appreciated her calling, and I meant it. But trust isn't something you get back just because enough time passes. It's something you rebuild in small pieces, if it gets rebuilt at all. My dad never called. I graduated the following spring with a partial scholarship to the community college where I'd already been taking dual enrollment classes, and Russ gave me a raise and more hours at the shop the same week. I moved into a small apartment near campus that fall, paid for with money I'd earned myself, on my own terms, answering to nobody. People think revenge looks like a moment, a confrontation, a mic drop, some perfect line that ends everything in one shot. It wasn't like that for me. It was a folder of receipts. It was a woman named Denise who kept picking up the phone even when she didn't have to. It was a shop owner who filed a police report because it mattered, and an aunt who never once made me feel like a burden. It was patience, mostly, just refusing to disappear quietly, one document at a time, until the truth had nowhere left to hide.